right. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, love under will.
If you respond to that, you probably already know a little too much for this lecture. This is a very introductory lecture to Aleister Crowley's magic. We're going to be touching on basically three subjects: Aleister Crowley, the law of Thelema, and Aleister Crowley's magical system. Now, each one of those deserves its own lecture, at least. So, like I said before we started, I'm basically assuming you know nothing, and this lecture is for people who basically know nothing. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of information at a very fast pace. I hope you leave with the impression, if nothing else, that Aleister Crowley is someone worth studying. There is something there that is worth studying. So let's go. So first we'll talk about who was Aleister Crowley. I'll go through a few tidbits about who he was if you know absolutely nothing about him. I'm not going to be giving a brief biography because there are many great biographies out there. In particular, if you're wondering, I would recommend Perturabo by Richard Kaczynski. That is kind of the #1 historical review of Crowley's life. The other one I'd recommend is Aleister Crowley by Tobias Churton. It's not as comprehensive, but he's more of an author instead of a kind of a academic, and so it's much easier to read. He goes more in depth into certain stories, but he leaves out other things. But they're very good. You can find lots of information on Crowley's life. Then we'll talk about the law of Thelema, which it's one phrase that most people know is "do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." It formed the basis of Crowley's life, and therefore also his magical philosophy. And then we'll talk about Crowley's magical system. Each of these subjects, like I said, could easily have a lecture or 10 on any of them. They are, in a way, distinct subjects. In another way, they're very overlapping. You can't really understand Crowley's magical system without understanding his life and the influences that he had. You can't understand Thelema without understanding his magical system and how he understood Thelema as expressed through ceremonial ritual, and so on and so forth. So I want to acknowledge my huge debt for this lecture in particular to this book called The Wiser Concise Guide to Aleister Crowley by Richard Kaczynski. This is a very thin book. It's probably in my opinion, it is the best introduction to Crowley, his life, and his system. So, Aleister Crowley. So first of all, it's Aleister Crowley. It's not Aleister Crowley. That's #1. Just get that out of the way at the beginning. So Ozzy Osbourne had it wrong, basically. How do we know this for sure? There's actually poems that Crowley wrote with his own name in it. And he said, where are you going looking so holy? Oh, I'm going to worship Crowley, right? Or he's like, there's another one, he's like, those who wish to treat me foully, they call me Crowley. So there are these rhymes that give us the understanding of how his name was actually pronounced. It's a very quick way, if someone's talking like on the internet, to know if they actually know what they're talking about or not. So he left his mark on many, many different fields. He left his mark on pop culture, for sure. He still is making a mark on pop culture. And in general, Crowley was someone who wanted to live life to the fullest, right? So he excelled at whatever he focused on. He was a polymath of sorts. And I think, in general, his life serves as an example of the great potential that life can offer. He did so many different things that he himself joked that he wouldn't be remembered as a man, but as a solar myth. It must have been multiple people's stories cobbled together into a single myth of Aleister Crowley. He wasn't actually a man that did all these things. That's impossible, right? So what were some of the things that Crowley did? So primarily, we know Crowley as the occultist who fused magic and mysticism. He mastered both Western magic and Eastern mysticism. Those are titles that cover many different fields, but he generally fused the knowledge of East and West of his time into his system. So he is probably the most identifiable representative of occultism in Western Hermeticism in the 20th century. If you hear about magic or occultism, chances are you will hear about this guy, right? Probably not in a good light, but you will hear about him. So he was the founder of Thelema, a new religious movement, best known by "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," and we will talk about this much more in depth later. He was also a prolific poet. His collected works at age 30 spanned 3 volumes. He published poetry throughout his life. He was even included in the Oxford Book of English Mystical Verse in 1917 or so. He had some form of recognition. Some people loved him. Most people did not. But he was a very prolific poet. And when he talks about himself, he often talks about himself primarily as a poet. He was also a maverick mountaineer who has numerous mountain climbing innovations and records that are acknowledged even by his most vocal critics. So he helped lead the very first expedition of what we now call K2, which is the second largest mountain in the world. Right? So this is actually in the very center here. That's actually Aleister Crowley during a mountaineering trip. There was also a very difficult climbing face in England called Beachy Head. It's very chalky and everyone considered it incredibly dangerous. And Crowley climbed it without any help, any accessories, no ropes, no claws or anything. That's actually him sitting there at the top. He was also a secret agent. So this is somewhat of a controversial topic, but he marshaled his literary and occult connections to work for the British secret, as a British secret agent, or at least as an asset. He allegedly even created the V for Victory sign that was used as a sort of magical antidote to the swastika, so he says. There's a complex occult reasoning behind that, why it's an antidote to that. But there are records of him talking about this sign before it's ever used publicly. It's such a large topic, there's an entire book about this called Secret Agent 666, Aleister Crowley, British Intelligence, and the Occult by Richard Spence. He's in this field of intelligence, and history of intelligence, I should say. Very interesting book if you're into that. The picture at the bottom refers to he purportedly had a role in the sinking of the Lusitania. How? I guess you'll have to read that book to find out more. I don't have time. He was also a chess master. He could trounce pretty much anyone. He was, as a kid, he was basically a master, and he actually could beat people without looking at the chessboard. He could visualize the board and still win. If you don't think this is possible, there's actually a lot of people that can do this nowadays. It's pretty incredible. Doesn't diminish the fact that many people can do this, that he did this way back when. There's like a story of him playing 3 chess tables blindfolded and winning them all. He also, as a kid, went to this chess tournament and saw all these haggard old men, and he said to himself, he kind of had a vision of himself in the future, and he said, there goes Aleister Crowley, chess master, looking all decrepit and old. And at that moment, he decided, he would do something more with his life than just master chess. There's still a hobby. So here he is. This is Aleister Crowley, looking a little healthy, I guess. And Fernando Pessoa is over here, who is a famous Portuguese poet and author. Fernando Pessoa, here's something to throw out, helped Aleister Crowley fake his own death. So there's this story of Crowley leaving a note at the top of a cliff, of a suicide note, and it was all over the papers. And Fernando Pessoa helped him kind of stoke those flames. He was kind of a troll before there were trolls. Definitely a jokester. Crowley was also a psychedelic pioneer. He was a pioneer of entheogenic exploration. He conducted experiments using peyote earlier than pretty much anyone in the Western world. He got this in Mexico. So he was also doing experiments with hashish and writing about their effects, combining meditation, deep meditation, with hashish. And so this book, Roll Away the Stone, is actually a collection of 2 of Crowley's essays, The Herb Dangerous, which refers to hashish, and essays on the psychology of hashish. Those are essays Crowley wrote that are intended to be pretty straightforward expositions of the psychology behind hashish, what it does to you, and how it can be used for mystical exercises. So Crowley knew that Hashishans, other people, Sufis, have used this for meditation. He's also purportedly the source of where Aldous Huxley first got mescaline from. So Aleister Crowley may have kind of inadvertently led to the drug revolution. He was actually called, Timothy Leary said that he was carrying on the work of Aleister Crowley in everything he did. Don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, depends on your perspective on Leary, I guess. But he was very influential. He was also, of course, vilified by what is essentially the National Enquirer of the day. It was called John Bull. And it called him the wickedest man in the world. It also said, a man we'd like to hang. Pretty intense. But this was after World War I, with mass murder and everything. And, of course, this guy is the wickedest man in the world. Right? So, one big thing about Crowley is there's a lot of stuff spread about him. How he's a devil worshiper. He ate babies, that kind of thing. He was the subject of a lot of fake news, basically, back then, right? So people were just making a huge spectacle out of him. One thing to note is that Crowley was also brought up in a very Orthodox Christian home, one of the Plymouth Brethren. And he was schooled in the Bible and that form of Christian religion, and he was actually able to recite chapter and verse of the Bible. He knew it so well. This is actually made fun of in the movie Chemical Wedding that's done by Bruce Dickinson. I don't know if you guys have heard of this. It's a movie about Crowley. It's very bad. But there's a scene where he starts rattling off Bible verses to impress people at Oxford or something. So let's talk about some myths about Crowley. So this refers to the myth that Crowley is the father of Barbara Bush. I guess I'll talk about that one later. I'll make the big reveal later as to whether it's true. But I think you can guess. So the big myth is Crowley was a black magician, devil worshiper, satanic orgies, that kind of thing. So this is somewhat of a difficult question because to Christians, pretty much anyone who's not your brand of Christian is a Satanist, is a black magician, is a sinner, whatever. That's not, I guess he is a black magician in that sense. Anyone who's not a Christian is a black magician. But usually what is meant by black magician is someone who uses magical forces or whatever to harm other people, to cast spells and curses and, make evil things to harm people. So Crowley actually addressed this very specifically, and he said, I've been accused of being a black magician. No more foolish statement was ever made about me. I despise the thing to such an extent that I can hardly believe in the existence of people so debased and idiotic as to practice it. So he was pretty strong about he was not a black magician. Of course, he would say that, right? But actually not. He called himself the Great Beast 666, but he still did not consider himself a black magician. We'll see when we talk about Philema that he's pretty much the opposite of a black magician. His philosophy is based on personal freedom, on light life, love, and liberty, and it's pretty hard to get further away from the typical notion of what a black magician is. So another myth is that he died in poverty, and this is somehow used as an argument against him and his life. Of course, Jesus Christ died as a rich king, right? And so did Buddha, right? So the argument doesn't make a whole lot of sense, as historically many teachers have died in poverty. The thing is he didn't. Okay, so he actually died in a boarding home called Netherwood that was, by those standards, very cushy. And he had a lockbox under his bed with money from OTO, actually. And it was, I forget, a substantial amount, but he never touched it. Never needed to. Right. So there's this quote, the Beast, this is Crowley, remained in good spirits at the end of his life, enjoying the comings and goings of Aleister Ataturk, which is his kid, and other children, who adored him in turn. Crowley did, however, remain in bed, The day before he died, he talked calmly at length with this woman named Patricia McAlpine. The following day was a still one, but at the moment of Crowley's death, which came quietly, the curtains in his room were caught in a gust of wind, and a peal of thunder was heard. It was the gods greeting him, said McAlpine. So there were people there. Nothing really happened. He just kind of dropped dead. That's obviously a little dramatized with the gust of wind and all that, but he just died one day. It's really not that spectacular. He never said, "I'm perplexed." He never said, "I rescind everything and come to Jesus," or anything like that. I've seen plenty of things of what his last words were. Apparently someone heard a thud. He fell off the bed or fell down trying to get out of bed and went up and he was dead. I know reality is not so sensational as the myths, but also, so Barbara Bush is Aleister Crowley's daughter. As you can see, they look a lot alike. But the thing is that Crowley's old bald head looks like pretty much every old white person, especially as they get older. They all tend toward Crowley face at the end of life, especially English people, English descended people. Of course, apparently Barbara Bush's mother at one point knew Crowley or spent some time with him or was in the same city as him or something. But this all started on literally an April Fool's post by a news organization. It just kind of caught fire. Lots of people believed it for a little while, then it died out. Of course, it came back for a second in this last election. There's Jeb Bush. And say, "Grandfather, sure, why the hell not? Thanks, Jeb, I missed this conspiracy theory." So no, Barbara Bush is not the daughter of Crowley, and Jeb Bush and George W. are not the grandsons, fortunately or unfortunately.